Hi, everybody. My name is Yuval, and I'm a research team lead at Armis.
I'm Gal, and I'm a researcher at Armis.
Also with us is Noam, which we're going to meet during the demo. OK, so first, a quick word about Armis. Armis is a company that does passive network monitoring, asset inventory, and anomaly detection. We are part of the research team, which focuses on vulnerability research of embedded devices. We discover critical vulnerabilities that impact billions of devices and design and innovate security solutions to mitigate the risk that stems from IoT devices. And this is what we're going to cover today. What Tailstorm actually is, what is software supply chains and attack vector, how we found these vulnerabilities and how they are connected, and some hardware hacking techniques we needed along the way. And of course, a live demo. Expect some smoke. So Tailstorm is a set of 8 critical vulnerabilities found across 3 popular device lines, like network switches by Aruba, network switches by Avaya, and smart UPS devices by APC. We successfully exploited some of these vulnerabilities to remote code execution, and one of these enables the attacker to bypass the captive portal in the Aruba switches, while others allows an attacker to cause physical damage, like you're going to see in the demo. So what is software supply chain? For our purposes, it means that most services and products built today are based on third-party code. For example, the typical website contains approximately 70% third-party code. And this is true, in essence, also for embedded devices, where a lot of the code is shared among many different products. And as you can probably know, this can be a big risk. And these 2 cases are proof. The first one is the Log4Shell case from last December, which got the whole security world on its feet. One simple vulnerability in a logging package affected tens of thousands of other packages and dozens of high-profile companies and services. And the other is Urgent 11, which is a set of 11 vulnerabilities in the IPNet TCP/IP stack. Multiple embedded operating system used this software component, and because billions of devices use these operating systems, billions were affected. So let's map this out. Shared code means shared risk, because one vulnerability impacts many different products. And also, shared code means bigger upside for hackers, because if one vulnerability impacts many different devices, it is worth more to find. But on the other hand, shared code means more security resources, because if the risk is shared, there are many more people with incentive to help secure the code. And this brings us to the comparison between open source code and closed source code. The main security upside for closed source code is that it makes it harder for hackers to acquire the code to search for weaknesses. Or in other words, security by obscurity, instead of opening the books, hiding them. On the other hand, the main security upside for open source code is that you get a community alongside with the code. It's true that it's easier for hackers to gain access to the code, but also for the security community, which all share an incentive to help secure it. What you also get is a community of developers helping you to figure out how to use the library. And as we'll shortly see, this can be just as important. So our research today is going to focus on a specific closed source library called NanoSSL. This library is developed by Mokana, which was recently acquired by DigiCert. And as you can see, our research led us to many different companies that use the code of NanoSSL, like Aruba and Avaya, which both create IT devices, and APC, which is a manufacturer of UPS devices. And here you can see that attacks against these such devices is a real risk. On the top, you can see an example of a wide-scale attack against network switches, and on the bottom, a CISA alert from UPS attacks. So let's begin with the first name on the list, Aruba. We found many different device series that use NanoSSL from Aruba, and we found many interfaces in these devices that use it. We chose to focus on the captive portal interface, like you can see on the bottom right, which is a bad interface to be vulnerable, because it is by design aimed at users before authentication and without authorization. And let's take a closer look. The first thing we need to know is that NanoSSL defines error codes, just like any other library. And handling these error codes is the vendor's responsibility, like closing a session in case of an error. And as you can probably guess, this is something that is really easy to miss. Let's take a look at the code. So here we have a call to the receive API, which is properly handled. Next, there is another call, which is not properly handled. The inner loop will exit, but the outer won't, and there will be another call to receive, even if the previous one failed. This leaves the session hanging and causes state confusion, which leads to a remote code execution vulnerability. And this is why. This is internal code by NanoSSL. This code is responsible for the TLS reassembly from TCP stream. And to understand why this leads to remote code execution, we're going to first follow the happy flow of reassembling two TCP packets. This is the initial state. Please note that there is a pre-allocated buffer of 1,000 hexabytes internally. First, the state is checked, and because this is the first packet, reassembly is not needed. Next, the header is read, which changes the state, which is checked here, and it passes to the extraction of the length from the header of, let's say, 3,000 hexabytes. This is a valid length according to NanoSSL, so the internal buffer is reallocated to that size, and the rest of the chunk is read. Now for the second packet, the state is checked once again, and because this is reassembly state, the rest of the chunk is read and the process finishes. Now for the vulnerable flow. We begin in the same manner, with the same state check, the same reading of the header, and once again, the same state check. Now, when we extract the length for the vulnerable flow to take place, we give a bigger size than is allowed of, let's say, 5,000 hexabytes. And because this size is too big, this check will fail and the function will exit. But remember, this is before the relocation took place. So the internal buffer is still too little. Now we send another packet. The state is checked, which indicates reassembly. And the other chunk is read, even if it's smaller, even if it's bigger than the internal buffer. This leads to a heap overflow, which we successfully exploited to remote code execution. And this remote code execution not only allows to bypass the captive portal interface, it allows a full takeover of the device, which can allow an attacker to hop VLANs and move laterally within the networks and access restricted parts of the network. And while this vulnerability is not actually within NanoSSL, it still stems from it, because one improper error check should not lead to heap overflow. This leads us to the question, all other vendors always close their session, right? I guess you can guess the answer to that one. So if we look at this list, we can successfully say that we found a misuse of NanoSSL that leads to remote code execution in the Aruba device. Now for the next name, Avaya. This code is responsible for parsing the HTTP post header in the web portal interface. It is also a missing error code check, and it stems from the assumption of the code that there would be a \n after a \r. If we take a look here, there is a call to the receive API, which is properly handled, another call to the receive API, which is not properly handled. The loop would go around, and another call to the receive API, even if the previous one failed, just like before, and the vulnerability is triggered, just like before. So we can add another name to the list of devices that misuse the NanoSSL library, which led to a remote code execution vulnerability. And for the next name of the list, APC, which is a manufacturer of UPS devices. So a quick recap of what is a UPS device. In the normal operation, the UPS device relays the power from the grid to the connected devices. And in case of an outage, it automatically switches to the battery mode, not letting the connected devices suffer any downtime. And by design, these should be devices which are mission critical, who cannot suffer any downtime. More specifically, we're talking about smart UPS devices by APC. which are probably the most popular UPS devices in the world, with over 20 million units sold, which can be found in about 8 out of 10 enterprise networks. These devices are considered smart in two main aspects. The first is that the software has a big part of the electrical operation of the device. And the second is a feature called Smart Connect, which is basically a dedicated Ethernet port connecting the UPS to the cloud. This leads us to the question, combining these two smart aspects of the device, is there a potential risk here? And to answer that, we needed to get our hands on the code, which, as you can see here, is mainly encrypted. So we needed a different approach, the board itself. There we found two SoCs, or CPUs. One of them is closer to the PHY, which is the chip that is responsible for parsing and sending of Ethernet frames. We figured because this SoC is closer to the PHY, it is the one that is responsible for the network operations, which is where we expect to find the NanoSSL code. We also found this interface, which is connected to the debug pins of the SoC, which should allow us to debug the SoC directly. So we connected to it, and this is what happened. OK, you cannot hear the sound, but there should be a really annoying beep sound right now. And this sound means that the device is frozen until unplugged. So after some head scratching, we went to the wisest of them all, which in this case is the CPU's datasheet. There we learned about a feature called RDP. What is RDP, you ask? This is how it's described. But I only want you to take a look at the important code and only the important. So what this basically means is that once the debug interface is connected, access to the flash is shut out until a reboot. So to summarize, if we connect the JTAG, we don't have access to the flash anymore, but we do get a snapshot of the RAM. So we cannot just dump the firmware, but we didn't give up. We just needed a little help from a little friend, which in this case is a smaller UPS device by APC. We labeled these two devices with and without because only one of them has the Smart Connect feature, but both of them are considered smart. So we figured there would be some similarities which are going to help us. Both of the devices have RDP support, but as we found out, on the small UPS, it is turned off. This was surprising because we already know that APC knows about this feature and how to use it, but nonetheless, it was turned off. So we were able to just dump the firmware, reverse it, focusing on the decryption part, so we can decrypt the original firmware. But as we found out, they use a different encryption, so that couldn't work. The last clue we found is that they have a similar firmware package structure, which was a big hint, as you'll shortly see. We figured a similar firmware structure means a similar update process. So we took a look at the update process of the small UPS. It decrypts the firmware chunk by chunk, each time storing the decrypted chunk in memory. So, and remember, we can take a peek at the RAM of the original firmware. So we deduced the address of the decrypted buffer chunk in the original firmware's RAM and found it. So we have now this approach. We initiate a firmware update. We wait for the correct chunk to be stored in RAM. We dump the RAM to extract the chunk, and reboot to exit the RDP restricted state. And we can do that time and time again. We can do that time and time again, each time for a different chunk, and extract the whole firmware. But to check the viability of this approach, each iteration requires a lot of human interaction, like timing for the correct chunk, pressing of physical buttons to initiate the update, and pulling out the battery for the hard reboot. Each iteration like that requires about 5 minutes. And even if we do get a different chunk each iteration, there are about 1,200 chunks in total. So to summarize all of this, it's going to take us weeks of grinding to extract the firmware. So we tried this approach. We used a Raspberry Pi to control all of the elements, which are the power pins of the SoC instead of pulling out the battery, the electrical signal of the buttons instead of pressing them, the debug interface to dump the RAM, and timing with better precision that we could ever get manually. On the right, you can take a look at our Frankenstein setup, which you can read more about in the white paper. So after a night of running this setup, we successfully got the decrypted firmware. And now Gal will explain what we found over there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so guess what we found there in the code? We found our beloved NanoSSL package. And you can see here a usage of this NanoSSL receive function. And actually, this is the only usage in the entire code of the UPS. And this is a good approach to have a concentrated usage, because this way you have to handle the return error only once. But surprisingly enough, APC forgot to handle the return error number in their only usage. And we already know the consequences of that. Not handling your errors mean, in this case, TLS state confusion, which means a heap overflow. And indeed, we were able to find two critical pre-authentication vulnerabilities. And by that, we can safely say that we have a 3 out of 3 success rate of finding critical vulnerabilities stems from basically the same trick of the missing error check of NanoSSL. But as I mentioned, we found 2 vulnerabilities. And the first is the one that you're already familiar with, the one from the Aruba, the heap overflow. But in some cases, you want a more elegant vulnerability, one that does not corrupt any memory. And we will show you how state confusion in a TLS can go even wilder. And in this case, we found a way to bypass the authentication of the Smart Connect feature of the UPS that connects it to the management cloud. And from there, we could masquerade as a verified cloud and do whatever the cloud does. And to understand this feature, you first have to be familiar with kind of a niche TLS feature called TLS resumption. And this feature allows parties to exchange session ID in the authentication phase and to store it alongside the generated master secret that it is used for the encryption and decryption of the communication phase. And when the two parties want to reestablish their connection, all they need to do is to present the same session ID again. And from there, they can fetch the master secret from their cache and hop straight to the communication phase. But this feature has a hidden risk within it, because if one side is somehow able to persuade the other one that the resumption flow should be taken, although the first authentication phase didn't take place before, it means that the master secret that will be used was not generated, and in times it could be predictable, not so secret master secret. And this way, the malicious side can bypass the authentication phase. And in our case, we know that the NanoSSL missing handling bug allows that if we store the session ID, which happens during the NanoSSL handshake, and fails right after, the session keeps hanging. And it means that the master secret that is generated only after the handshake will not be generated by that point, and the session ID will be waiting in the SSL object for the next handshake packet. And we can think of a malicious flow like this one. We send a bad handshake with a session ID of our choice, and it fails, and we send a valid handshake packet for the resumption flow with the same session ID, and the client is fooled to think this is a resumption flow, and it fetches a master secret, which in this case is the initialization value of the object of zeros, which the attacker can predict. And this is how it looks step by step. Captive portal, we can move laterally. So for the next step, I'll introduce you with the new actor in this demo, and this is the UPS that we are gonna make some really bad things to. And as you can see, it's connected to a lamp. It's a very important lamp. It cannot tolerate any downtime, never. So it's connected to a UPS device, and it represents the most important data centers that you can dream of that they cannot tolerate any downtime, or MRI machines or whatever. And now Noam will look for it with ARP command as a neighbor, and he can't find it. And why is it possible? Because of segmentation. probably. So let's see what villains are configured in this switch. And as you can see, we have two villains. One is the guest villain, and one is a secret corporate villain. That sounds really interesting. Our port 15 is connected to the guest VLAN, as we could predict. So now we will move laterally. We'll disable the secret corporate VLAN, and we will connect all the ports to the same VLAN so they can be accessed from the guest VLAN, from our attacking computer. And now we will attempt to run the ARP command again, and we expect to find the UPS. And this might take up to, OK, it happened really quick. And as you can see, this new device is the UPS. And this is the IP, NSWIS 28. And we will launch now the UPS attack, as we promised. And by controlling the switch, we control the layer 2 traffic. And by that, we can navigate all the traffic that goes out of the UPS directly to our attacker computer, to the CNC. And by that, we can launch our authentication bypass attack, as I showed you, and install our malicious firmware. But this might take up to 10 minutes, so I won't do this right now. I already done it earlier today. And you can see the demonstration of the full installation on our website. What we did now is waiting for connection of the malicious Trojan that we installed on the UPS, and we can launch the physical attack now. So we will start with the most obvious attack. We will turn the lamp off. We'll turn all the connected power supplied devices off, as you can see. And this might not look dramatic because we just turned off a lamp here, but imagine that this is the most important resources of the entire network that we just shut down. And to make it even cooler, we will now show you the overvoltage attack with the square wave. OK. So as you can see, it shines much, much more brighter because of the overvoltage. And if you hear, there is a quite annoying sound from the UPS. And this is because it is not supposed to supply such a high voltage, and not mentioning that it is not designed to supply a square waveform, which can damage both the UPS itself and the connected devices, as I explained. But now, for the jewel of the crown, let's toast the UPS. And this is the last attack, simply because the UPS is not going to work after this. Do you hear this? So this beep means that the UPS is suffering right now. So we will pray for him together. And in a minute or so, it's supposed to explode and be covered in smoke, if it will work. OK. It should happen any minute, any second. And just before it is covered with smoke, you will hear a sound of explosion. Not a very loud one, but find cover. That's the last opportunity for you to find cover. Yeah. The air conditioning system is so strong here, so it takes. OK, you can hear that. And you can smell this too, I think, because it is not just a regular smoke. It's an electrolyte material. It's really healthy. You have masks, so if you don't feel comfortable with it. OK, so basically that's it. There's going to be more smoke until I don't know what. we can check together. I hope the battery won't explode.
You can pull it out.
Okay, that's enough smoke.
That's all the effects we need. So after this exciting demo, which you just seen, let's recap how it looks like in the network perspective. First, the attacker will try to enter the network through the switch and will be prompted with a captive portal interface. From there, they can respond with this beautiful logo and take over the switch and just enter the network without any problems. They can also hop into the internal, very secret network and access all sorts of sensitive information and sensitive devices. They can also use the same logo to take over the UPS and launch attacks against connected devices or even the UPS itself, as we've just seen live on stage. And if we want to summarize, after these three devices, which we've seen all suffer from a remote code execution vulnerability that stems from NanoSSL, there are many more users from Okana and NanoSSL, and all of them could possibly have made the same mistake and could possibly suffer from the same vulnerability. And as we said, a shared code means shared risk. And if you ask yourself how you can be protected from such attacks, there are three main paths you can take simultaneously. The first is, of course, apply patches where they are applicable. The second is to minimize the attack surface when you can. In our case, it means that if you don't use the Smart Connect feature of the UPS, you should disconnect it. And the last thing you can do is to monitor communication, so you can know which devices you have, which are vulnerable, and be alerted if such an attack comes your way. And to summarize, these are our three main takeaways from this talk. External libraries could be a weak spot. As we said, shared code means shared risk. And knowing how to use the library is just as important as choosing one. Security by obscurity is obsolete. And because, as we've just seen, closed source and encryption would not stop the determined attackers, because determined attackers would always find a way. And lastly, when you design a network, you should take the physical aspect of devices into account when you consider the security aspects. Because lateral movement and data exfiltration are very serious issues, but some devices hold the literal power to cause damage in ways that are all too easy to disregard. Or in other words, thank you all for listening. I hope you take these points into account. And that's it.